The short story called The Nose, which is a 10-page absurd story, Chekhov described as the greatest short story ever written. And the story is very simple. It's a story of a man who wakes up one morning and finds that his nose has gone. The short story by Gogol and the opera by Shostakovich both follow the fortunes of collegiate assessor Kovalyov as he tries to track down his nose. And eventually, when he finds his nose, to his horror, he discovers that his nose is now a higher bureaucratic rank than he is, and his nose refuses to speak to him. So it's both about what constitutes a person. How singular are we and how much are we divided against ourselves? How coherent are we? And it's also about the terrors of hierarchy. The premise of the production is the set, the scenery, also existing as a huge screen for projection. The singers both sometimes extremely clearly seen. The focus and the lights are just on the singers on this huge stage, and then they're kind of obliterated and lost inside a huge projection. So that sense of things that seem solid being very evanescent is an ongoing theme that I'm interested in. In the opera, there are 4 or 5 sections in which there is no action. There are no actors, there are no voices, there's no singing. There's just musical interludes. For me, they're kind of extraordinary moments of doing sideways explorations which aren't directly there in the story but which relate to it, following the nose on its other journeys, the nose in love, the nose wanting to be a Politburo member. All the parts that, when the nose isn't on stage, and he's only on stage for a very few moments, all the other things that could be happening. The images are both made up out of archival footage from various Soviet archives, which are mixed with images of the nose, sometimes literally. A projection of a military parade and the person riding the horse has an image of the nose superimposed on it. Very low-tech. It's a projection on a table. It's a torn piece of paper that made the nose, and it's advanced one frame and refilmed, and advanced one frame and refilmed. So the kind of filmmaking itself is very low-tech and hands-on. We need the nose to dance, so it's an old piece of footage of Anna Pavlova which has the nose superimposed on her. So it's that kind of absurdity taken both in its self-reflection that for me is a key to the opera, taking the absurd very seriously, learning from the absurd. I mean, there's a big question, is it tragedy or comedy a way of dealing with huge social cataclysms? And Gogol's answer and Shostakovich's answer in this opera is very much through the strange mixture of the brutal comic that we get closest to the actual logic of the world. My belief in what one can learn from the absurd, or the absurd being an appropriate representation of the world, is very much related to growing up in South Africa, where you had the apartheid system, which is both about evil but also about a crazy logic, an absurd logic. I love in the opera the sense of everything being possible. That sense of possibility in the music and the sense of possibility in the story. If you can make a story out of someone losing their nose, such an absurd single-line premise, there's a sense of energy and agency it gives in how one either sees the world or uses the world for making images or theater.
We went to see the Metropolitan Opera's production of Lulu. Anybody saw that?
Yeah.
Met live at the Met. And the staging was so amazing, the visuals were so amazing, and it was all done by Wm Kentridge. So that aroused my interest, and so I learned a little bit about him by Googling. But we have an expert here who knows a lot more about him than what you can find on Google. So I'll just well, if we don't need to go some bio, we'll come back to this. This is about his animated films, which I think Darryl will talk about, and his sculpture, which Darryl has one. And this is a very good biography, this PBS one. but I'm going to leave that one alone too. I like the way he says, why should we be interested in a clearly impossible story? Because, as Gogol says, in fact, the impossible is what happens all the time. So not only did he do the staging for Lulu, but also for the Metropolitan's Magic Flute and for the Nose. Very interesting the way it's done. And this is just a little collage that I put together. And now, introduce Darryl Abramson, dentist extraordinaire and art collector. Darryl, are you ready?
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Faye, and thank you to everyone for attending. It's a great opportunity to talk about Wm Kentridge, probably the most famous living South African artist. Can everyone hear, by the way? Yes. So the introduction was very kind, but I do want to make clear that I don't know Wm well personally. I have met him on a few occasions, and we have many mutual friends, and I've collected his work since the late 1980s. I'm not an expert on Wm or on South African art, but have been interested in it for about 30 years. My interest started in 1982 when my dad bought me a piece for my 21st birthday. This led me on a tortuous path of collecting unconnected works. The path then narrowed to a more thematically consistent body of work that was contemporary, it was South African, and it was loosely political at that time. This period, the 1980s until the early 2000s, was an interesting time to collect South African art for many reasons. During the apartheid years, there was turmoil that I think was a fertile ground for fine, creative, and expressive art. In addition to that, there were sanctions against South Africa that included sports and a cultural boycott, and so the local artists were relatively unknown internationally and had challenges over and above the usual ones that artists deal with in getting established. In addition to that, the interest in art was at a low ebb in South Africa, both at a private and a public level. The public level was easy to understand. There wasn't much budget for public art collecting. I'm not sure why the private sector was not particularly interested, but they weren't. The South African community was collecting more international artworks, and they to some extent devalued the work of the South African artists. The result was that there was an opportunity for interested people to get close to a very small but vibrant art community, see some inspired work, and even collect it affordably. I was lucky to have been interested at this point and have collected some things that I enjoy today in the office. So from that brief introduction, I hope it's clear that I neither studied art formally nor really studied it informally, but I have been immersed in it, and it's from that perspective that I'll talk briefly tonight and share a few moments that I think will bring a fresh perspective. When it comes to Wm Kentridge, as you've already heard from Faye, there is so much that one can talk about, and it's quite a challenge to know what to bring to this discussion. I aim to keep the talk quite short and will give you just a few anecdotes that are pertinent, rather than trying to put together some chronologically and thematically fluent talk. So forgive me if it seems a little disjointed or if it's not quite complete. I'm happy to do questions and answers afterwards if people have questions, and hopefully I'll be able to answer some of them. It was very kind of Faye not to go through his biographical stuff, because that leaves me the opportunity to talk about that which I had prepared to do. Wm was born in 1955. He grew up in Johannesburg and came from a family of interesting people, many of whom were luminaries in their fields. His grandfather was Morris Kentridge, a Lithuanian-born lawyer and politician who emigrated from the Russian Empire in those days to avoid the pogroms and anti-Semitism. He had a career in South Africa in politics and in law. His father, Sidney Kentridge, was a noted lawyer and had a great career. He was well known for his apartheid activism, which William was talking about in that little film you saw before we started. And he participated in many apartheid-era trials and was an anti-apartheid activist. He was involved in the Sharpeville trial, the investigation into Steve Biko's death, and Mandela's treason trial, among other important apartheid-era law work. His mother, Felicia, who recently passed away, was also an attorney. She started something called the Legal Resources Center. They represented black clients against the apartheid state and gave legal access to many people who would otherwise not have had legal access. His wife is Anne Stanwicks, who people on the internet, it says she's an immunologist, but she's a rheumatologist in Johannesburg, also very well known. Anyhow, William's career, like so many others in the arts, started with challenges. He studied politics and African studies at Wits University, where the three of us all went to school. Went on to learn about theater and mime in Paris in the hope of being an actor, and he tried film and directing. Then, as he puts it, he was not very good at any of those things, so he was reduced to being an artist, and he made peace with that. None of this history of family and of trying and failing in history, politics, opera, theater was lost in the process as he transitioned to artist, and I think that becomes pretty clear. Kentridge worked hard to get recognition, which was slow in coming. And this piece that I've put up in front of you depicts that quite well. It was done in the 80s, in 1985 to be exact. The scene will seem perhaps familiar to many of you, or at least after I pointed it out, perhaps more so. And I have it on hearsay that William did this work after meeting with some Guggenheim representatives in New York. I believe the meeting did not go well, and however, in recognition of the prominence of the Guggenheim family and of the iconic piece of architecture that is the Guggenheim Museum, he created this print with symbols of art and architecture and life central to New York. Represented in the middle is the Flatiron Building. Behind that is the Brooklyn Bridge. There's a yellow cab, or at least I was told it was a yellow cab. And there is a symbol of Africa on top of the cab, and that is the warthog. And then there is, in the foreground, the struggling artist walking aimlessly with his portfolio under his arm. So William wasn't always the famous artist we know today. His early work was replete with drawings and prints. His printmaker at the time was a master printmaker at a place called Caversham Press in the Natal Midlands, a man by the name of Malcolm Christian. I was friendly with a few people who were involved with that enterprise, and that was when I was introduced to his work. I got a few works of William's at that time, and I brought one of them with me to whet your appetite, and now I realize it's going to be hard for everyone to see, but you can come and look at it afterwards. It's this piece here, and it depicts, well, let's try. I'm actually going to show you a large format version of this in a moment. So there is a picture of a man and a woman who look remarkably like William and his wife. The piece is called The Battle Between Yes and No, and they are coming out of their mouths is no, yes, and noise. And then there's a little symbol of the Red Cross and a bone in the foreground. And I believe this was, it's an etching, I believe it was a study for a much larger format work called The Battle Between Yes and No. And this is that piece. I do have that in my house, so if any of you do come by, you can see it. This piece was done in 1989, I believe. It's a silk screen, and it is in the collection at the Museum of Modern Art. Now, when you hear William speak about his video work, he often talks about not having a set agenda as he engages with his ideas. He lets the work develop and perhaps even allows the work to derive meaning from the viewer's perspective. So I have heard this work being discussed by other people and have had meaning attached to it by inference and what I believe to be knowledge of what William intended. So a little background here. This piece was done at a time of turmoil in South Africa and in William and Anne's relationship. In South Africa, this was just before a referendum that was being debated about whether the white population in South Africa was moving towards a plebiscite to decide whether the government should negotiate with the African National Congress of Nelson Mandela. That vote was a very close vote, if I remember correctly. Do you remember? And anyway, the vote was taken to negotiate, and that was the beginning of reconciliation in South Africa. William at the time was experiencing marital inconvenience associated with who knows what, and that is the meaning of the battle between yes and no as I've heard it from other people. There is just, you know, perhaps obvious, I think, that these are alter egos of William and Anne in the yes and no camp and in the coming vote. Lots of polemical speak, lots of raised temperatures. There's even a little thermometer here. And lots of noise. Not a lot of listening, not a lot of nuance there. Many of Kentridge's works, drawings, prints, and animations had the characters Soho Eckstein and Felix Teitelbaum in them, and you saw that in the video that Faye was playing when you walked in or when you were sitting down. These two characters, who I believe to be alter egos of one another and perhaps even of William and his family, represent the dichotomy between good and evil present in all of us. Soho is the pinstripe suited, cigar smoking, rapacious capitalist who is fat from the fruits of his greed, while Felix is always naked, exposed, his conscience is exposed, and there is guilt associated with benefiting from apartheid, among other things, and perhaps even in recognition of escaping pogroms, Nazism, and anti-Semitism. I think that there is possibly even an element of guilt associated with William's own personal feelings about himself. The next work Soho, looking remarkably like William, dancing with a naked woman, not his wife, won him the award. It was the Standard Bank Artist of the Decade Award in South Africa. It was done in 1991. The character Soho appears in his works on Ubu and the Truth Commission, and those works were done after Anne had confronted him about his indiscretions. In those works, he appears like Felix, being self-flagellating and being cleansed. And here is what I mean. So there is a series of work called Ubu, where he collaborated with 2 other artists, and they reinterpreted the works of Alfred Jarry, of Ubu Roy, to suit their own contemporary interpretations of what those works should be. And here they are. That's the first one of him. Well, this is Felix. This is the conscience of Soho XD, whipping himself, self-flagellating. Here he is showering and I guess cleansing himself. The triangular thing over here with a little coil in the middle is a symbol of Ubu. And here he is in that same series of works, looking very ashamed and exposed, or at least that's how I understand it. The 3 artists, Hodgins, Bell and Kentridge, have collaborated on a few works, and they have done some interesting things together. William also made the animated films that you were watching some pieces of, and I think that is the format that made him most famous. He made the films by what he calls a Stone Age technique. He would draw a picture in charcoal on a piece of paper and shoot 2 frames. And then he would make erasures and shoot another 2 frames. And so on. And it took him a long time to make, 6 or 8 minutes worth of usable film. He would also sell those pieces of the paper as artworks afterwards, and those were somewhat collectible. He had collaborators, among the most important of whom was Philip Miller, who composed the soundtracks for many of the works. Between 1989 and 2003, he made 9 short films. They were gathered together under the title 9 Films for Projection. These films were shown collectively at a few venues, and I was lucky enough to see them in Johannesburg at the UNESCO World Heritage Site of the Old Fort. My wife Sue and I sat behind William's parents for the viewing. It was spectacular. The Old Fort is now part of the Constitution Hill precinct in Johannesburg. It was built by the Boers in the late 1800s to house the British invaders. The British then captured it in the Anglo-Boer War, and it was used to hold and occasionally execute Boer prisoners. Under the apartheid government, it was used to house white prisoners, and the nearby number 5 was used to hold the black prisoners. These are all, if anyone's in Johannesburg, all really worth a visit, as is the art collection in the Constitution Hill precinct. Nelson Mandela was held in the fort. You can only imagine this as a setting for the showing, with Sydney and Felicia in attendance. Those are his parents. They had been so involved in struggle law, and Sydney had met many of his clients right on the very spot in the bad old days where these movies were showing. So it was really poignant. And this was the poster that was made, and you see at the bottom that it was Old Fort, Constitution Hill, Johannesburg 2004. I brought a copy of one of the later movies, the 8th of the movies, called Tide Table, and I don't know if I should turn on 8 minutes worth of movie now or whether we should watch it at the end. It's quite beautiful, beautiful soundtrack. Would you prefer me to keep talking, or do you want to watch it? Do it now? Yes. So then let's switch over and just hit play. So this is called Tide Table. In this movie, he says he started out with his, let's not hit play yet. He started out with his paternal grandfather and an image of him on the beach. This is a beach in Cape Town. There are some little changing rooms on the beach. There are images of cows on the beach, which is a bit of an African thing. There are images of baptisms. And he just slowly let the story evolve. He let Philip Miller to somewhat determine direction here. And so it just, these movies that he made, he didn't start out with a set agenda. He often just worked on it, looked at it, redirected it, re-edited it, and this is what came out. I think it's quite beautiful.
Lama Sabakatani, Lama Salana maele, soki oyokini kabo. Salana maele, tango kofunda moninga bandeko. Likambwe bomamboka, biloba, likambwe bomamboka, songi bandeko.
So that is quite amazing that you could do all that with charcoal on paper and erasures, and that as William worked out that the froth on the top of a wave could be done just by erasing some charcoal off a piece of paper. So I think this was the medium, if I've understood it correctly, that helped launch William's career to the heights that it is today. I think that the movies were the thing that got him noticed. At documented 10 in Castle, I think in 1997, he was starting to find some fame, and certainly collectors around the world were starting to notice him in a very meaningful way. So this was the format that changed things, I think. Recently, my brother read a book by Mark Gafissa, who we knew in Johannesburg, called Lost and Found in Johannesburg, a memoir, and he gave it. Sorry about that. So Ian pointed out this book to me, and there was a chapter dedicated to some time that he spent with Wm Kentridge. And in this book, it's clear that both of them are cartophiles. They both love looking and studying maps. And William had even owned one of the original leather-bound folios entitled Plan of Johannesburg, a magnificently drawn and map of Johannesburg as they planned it to be, and it was signed by the cartographer. It was much more a plan of what they hoped the city would become rather than a representation of what was actually on the ground. Mark and William spent time musing about this and looking at the old maps and the rapidly changing landscape that was so clearly that, and from that it was very clear that what was about to happen in Johannesburg was clearly unpredictable. Johannesburg grew with great speed from nothing to where it is now, a city where the greater metropolitan area has about 11 million people. And the maps were, they had some funny things in them that we can talk about another time if we get an opportunity. Anyway, William used cut-up maps and street guides, among other things, to print on and incorporate into his art. He also used things like mine ledgers and other materials. And when one analyzes the importance of the maps or the ledgers, they lend themselves to deeper interpretation that goes beyond just the image or the drawing that's on the paper, but there's a sort of a layer of interpretation, because the map has meaning and the mine ledgers had meaning in terms of whatever capitalism, the area, the landscape, whatever he was thinking about at that time. He was commissioned to do a work for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which on that original map, actually I'm not sure about this, I think on the original map it was somewhere, and by the time he was commissioned, that stock exchange building had moved into the leafier suburbs north of the city, and so, you know, those changes happened quickly and things didn't happen according to the original plan. The city grew in a way that other cities that had grown more slowly and had more constraints, Johannesburg grew in a way that was unpredictable. So the image that he came up with for the Johannesburg Stock Exchange was that one. That just was by luck that I found that. And it's drawn on a map. That map is a slightly modified version of that original map that was drawn. There's a man with a typewriter head. This is a tapestry, by the way. And in the stool, there's a big rubber stamp. One can only imagine, you know, whether that has some meaning. You know, perhaps a corruptive influence somewhere. Scissors, those may have some meaning somewhere too. Now, tapestries are another oeuvre of his work. He does many tapestries, and in fact, when I was in Johannesburg last, the Wits Art Museum had a show that was predominantly of his tapestries, very large format. They can be 3 or 4 yards by another 3 or 4 or even 5 yards. They are done by some expert weavers, a remarkable technique with projection, under the guidance and tutelage of a woman named Marguerite Stevens. Marguerite comes from a family tradition of weaving. None of you are South African, but Coral Stevens, her mother, used to weave beautiful mohair fabrics that were in people's houses as curtains and bedspreads, and we wore them as scarves. It was a fantastic tradition, and Marguerite has taken this to another level, and there are some wonderful videos online, YouTube, so if anyone wants to look up just Wm Kentridge weaving or Marguerite Stevens, you'll find some very interesting video representations of how they managed to create a large format work like that on just by weaving. At around before 2010, at around the time when South Africa was due to host the World Cup of Soccer, the country wanted to present itself in a very positive light, and one of the places where they spent money and tried to promote the country was in public art. William worked with an artist by the name of Gerard Marx, and they created that piece. There are many photographs of this work, but what this is it's also actually sits in an important part of the landscape that was represented on that original map. It connects the art precinct with actually the area near our university. And there were railway lines in the vicinity, and the Queen Elizabeth Bridge, and now the Nelson Mandela Bridge in that area. And this piece is there, and it's a place where workers used to congregate. The railway lines are nearby. And women used to arrive early in the morning and make fires in those things that that woman is carrying on her head. And then they would sell that fire to other people that came in to cook food for the workers each day. And I think this sort of represents in that position in our city the hard work, the change, the rapid change that was happening, the workman-like nature of people just trying to make a living and take an opportunity to get involved in some sort of business dealing each day. So this was a very interesting piece that came up as a public work in just before the 2010 World Cup. This piece, as I said, looks different depending on where you view it from. And this is another of the things that William has explored. And maybe I attribute too much meaning, but I hear these things being debated. He was commissioned in the mid-2000s to do a piece by the Western Australia Art Museum. The Western Australia Art Museum wanted 4 big, large format sculptures, and he came up with something called the Shadow Quartet. So there were 4 different sculptures, and there were 4 each of them. So the Western Australia Art Museum bought a set, and then some other sets went around. And as you moved around each of those sculptures, they had a different meaning. So at every 90-degree point, the image became almost a completely different image. And this, again, if I haven't overinterpreted, was about William thinking about the way shadows change depending on where the source of light was. If it's right above, the shadow will be short. If it's far away, the shadows lengthen. If it's in one direction, the shadows do something else. And he was looking at that in the context of our memories and the way we remember politics and the way we remember our history and the selective nature of our thinking. So he liked to explore memory. And I think that this is just him building on that we sometimes just see things the way we want to see them. We forget things that we don't want to remember. And so these works that change depending on perspective, I think, are a study of that. Anyhow, with an open-ended talk like this about a prize-winning artist who has made a meaningful contribution to South Africa and probably indeed the world, you know, from the perspective of thinking and printing and drawing and sculpting and opera and tapestry, I kind of didn't know where to begin or where to end. So I think I'll just end now. No, actually, one more thing. Just a little quote from him. I'm only an artist. My job is to make drawings, not sense. And so I hope I've made some sense. And if not, I guess I'll claim to be an artist, and you can make some meaning out of the chaos that is my mind. And I thank you for listening to me. And now, I don't know if Faye wants to. If anyone has questions, I don't know if I'll be capable.